boom, 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 boom. Hello, hello, hello. How are we doing today? Here we go, the never-ending conundrum of, are people actually here yet? Hello, how we doing? Can you hear me? Can you see me? Is everything good? Can you not hear me? Oh, okay, good. Awesome. Well, that's a big bonus. It's always a... Okay. Oh, I lost my stylus. Oh, there it is. Aha. Alrighty. Here we go. So... we are going to discuss these guys and how to combine this stuff and how to decimate them and the such. See, it's so weird. It always says I'm offline and no one is watching. Oh well. So. Are we not supposed to have breasts? I can never remember. Here, we'll make this a top. Just in case. I don't remember if we're not supposed to have nudes. But we will. Just get rid. Oh no, that's not what we want to do. That's not what we want to do yet, that's for sure. Just in case we're not supposed to have nudes, I can't remember. So we'll do that. Right? Yeah, sometimes they get weird. So we don't want to offend people. Alright, so I assume we have some people here. What time is it? Yeah, I guess we can wait a couple minutes. So how is everyone? Everyone excited? Excitable, exciting. You can see this has been, so that's the original model. Come on, you can do it. I don't know what this is. It's super weird. I have this weird pixelation on this model, or this weird paint color. That's interesting. Obviously, that was when it Dynamesh. Alright. But then you can see decimating it down and trying to retain these veins, clean balls. You can see we started to remesh her face a little so her eyes are sharp. But you can see that we're just selectively adding geometry where we need it. So that's what we're going to be working on today. Well, thank you. Okay, what time is it? All right, that's okay. So once again today we're going to kind of go over sort of my technique of using how I use Sculptress Pro. I had a couple models I needed to sort of clean up anyway, so these are what we'll deal with. So this was the original model at 4.2 mil, and you can see I'm trying to exaggerate these features dramatically because, I mean, her face is what? I mean, you're dealing with 1.5 mil across. You know, her eyes are what? 0.3 of a mil? 0.4 of a mil. So, you know, you're dealing with her features being less than 0.5 mil. Now, this is post decimation frame. And you can see that we really start to lose mesh fidelity at this scale. Oop. Is there anyone here from ZBrush who tell me if I'm... Here, let's do this. Mask. X and Z. Extrude. Accept. And it's a top. We'll put boob covers on just in case. We'll deal with breast later. We'll wait until someone from ZBrush shows up and we'll ask if it's okay. So, you know, you can see that the details on this are going to be super small, and I sort of dislike the process of these tails. I don't think they ever really sold well, so we're going to change those as well. I think right, and that's a seat for a pearl. But you can see you really do start to lose quite a bit of mesh fidelity in here when you decimate this to a usable scale. We'll go clay tubes. So I have a positive that is not Sculptress Pro, right? Because I have back face on. And then these are Sculptress Pro. Now, okay, here's another thing. I have this dynamic brush scale out because if you'll notice down here, if I'm trying to really tune it, see how big that jump is? So I just drag my dynamic brush scale down. So as I come in here, I have much more control over the size of my decimation, right? And so we're just going to come back in, and we are going to give the areas that I want mesh that I know that I'm going to sculpt on, right? And you can see it's pretty tight, right? And once again, these are going to be pretty stylized because, like I said, we're dealing with something that is, you know, 0.4 of a mil. I'm just gonna give her face a smoothing. And this is also a way to get rid of some of this, you know, ugly geometry when if you have a printer that can actually deal with this scale of printing, you want to give it as much of a bonus as you can, or, you know, as much help as you can. Because this stuff is small. With the hair, we're not going to worry about it right now. We just want to get some of this texture out of her face. And we're just going to pick the size until it's smoothing that texture out, as opposed to you can see how it changed her nose and such. That's not really what we're looking for, but that's okay. And once again, we're not going for a lot of realism here because of the scale. We want to put something in here that's going to show after printing and the such. So we're going to want to punch these details out a little. And that's why she doesn't actually have eyeballs. You know, you're really kind of exaggerating the socket pupil sort of thing going down, right? Because you got to remember that. And what I found about this model too is I think actually her head wound up a little small. We could have beefed her head up a little, I think, because when you start getting with the wings and such, see, her head just appears small, right? So here we can kind of, and you can see how when we change our dynamic brush size as we come down, right, it gives me a far smaller spectrum of brush scale, but that's okay because it allows me to be fairly accurate with my brush scale. So I'm just gonna do this with her because I don't want to change this stuff back here too much because we like how that intersects, right? We're gonna erase some of this. And you notice I'm not changing the mesh at this point. It's kind of more helpful for what I'm about to do for it not to change the scale of this stuff. It'll blend in easier as we do it. And so we just come here, we go W, boop. Turn Y off. Turn Z off. Kind of get it in here. We're going to, oops. Kind of kick that up and we'll see how. See, it's actually in relation to the breast, it might be a little large, but it gives us a better transition because if we, hold on, let's hide this. And if you, and we're going to push the head back into place a little more, but that's going to get you a little more play out of the face, and it looks a little bit more relational with the torso with the wings. Where here, you can see, especially like from this angle, the head just reads small. And it was in scale originally, but yeah, now it just isn't very compelling. So we're going to bring this back in here. And you can see how, you know, we've grown some there. And this is why we didn't, or why I didn't, I'm going to hold down Shift. Get rid of that, hold down Shift. I don't want this on. I want to stay with this. And I'm just going to kind of work it back really quickly. And let's turn our X back on to Z so it's matching. And you can see by leaving the resolution super low, it allows us to kind of work back to that place. We're going to be redoing the hair anyway, so it allows us to kind of get us back to the place that we were. Right. Grab clay and just sort of fill this kind of back up to where we were. You gotta remember this is super small, so a lot of this detail really isn't going to right. And so now as we look back, you see how you just get a bit more face than you do here. Oop, frame. You know, that might be accurate, but when you get down, her head just looks small. So We're going to come back in here, frame, boop. Move her face up. All right. Come back in and just smooth that out. Kind of tippy tap that back into there. Just make sure everything's sort of smooth. All right, and so now we'll come back in and clay tubes. Get ourselves down here some. And you remember we're thinking about reflective surfacing. Let's get our intensity up. So I'm coming in with clay tubes, so that ridge, right, is going to be a nice reflective ridge. So you're going to see the front of that lid, right? And we're not worrying so much about the actual anatomy of an eye at less than 0.5 mil, obviously. So we will turn Sculptress Pro back on for smooth, and then flat surface. So you're creating the front lip of the eyelid where it's thick. Gonna give it a little bit more dynamics here. And keep going back and looking and seeing where your reflections are, right? And seeing what you're reading, right? You can see how that's going to become a nice reflective surface. And that's what you have to continue to think about as you're doing all this, is how are your surfaces going to read? Right. Get our brow in there. And then this. Fill this up a little more so we get a better reflection here. Make sure you're exaggerating that just so you're gonna be able to see it. We're gonna kind of mask this off some and just make sure that this just kind of has a little bit of return there. Because that that's the wrong brush, because you will get reflection off the half domes, right? All right. So oops. You're going to be careful if you're using your smooth to add in your geometry, because I'm using smooth to put geometry there, and I'm using the clay tubes without geometry so I retain my hard edges. And you know, make sure You can see she's kind of looking out there. That's not what we want. That's a little better. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So as you can see here, you know, we're starting to get some of that breakup. So we check out our mesh. You can see that somewhere when I smooth it with less geometry. You just come in, add the geometry around the edges where you know you're going to use it. Come back, turn that off, and just, you know, once again, we're not being super detailed here because we're just picking the high points that we're trying to sell in our reflection, right? Now I'll normally leave a little bump in there because even when you get tiny, often that little bump will reflect. Now I'm not going to leave it in the center, but because remember, you're painting in contrast. Even if you're not sulfuring, you're still going to, well, if you're going to wind up with a successful piece, you're going to find a way to get that contrast out. All right, so we want that. How do I get that to go away? Go away. All right. Stop it. I don't know how to turn that notification off. And you can see we're trying to think of it somewhat as an illustration because this flat edge is going to reflect really nicely. But that's a little high. Let's bring it down. You see what I mean? If you leave that a flat line, it's going to act as a reflective surface. Of course. Is there any way of using insert multiple with textures like Dynamesh? I have a mesh with textures, but textures is only visible when I use Dynamesh. What kind of textures are you talking about? Can you take a screenshot and post a link? I'll look at it and I'll tell you. I very rarely use things like nanomeshes and stuff. I tend to like to hand sculpt my own textures in, only because, I mean, the human eye can tell when the computer's doing things, and I like the truly randomness of the things I make, you know. But let's look at what you got, and I will be more than happy to give you an idea. You know, and once again, I'm not really worried dramatically about anatomy because this stuff is small. We're just trying to find like finding our reflective points, and it's also like here we will take clay and sort of scoop back here. And that line obviously is very dramatic, but it's going to sell the eyelid, you know, as part of the, you know, where you have the eyeball behind it. And those are pretty dramatic, but once again, when you start looking at it back here, you'll get the the bounce on the top of the lid, and then you'll get some darkness behind it. Oh yeah. Didn't work out well. Well, so you're trying to wrap it around a three-dimensional object. There's a way to use, yeah, it's a little trickier for sure. Let's either deal with it later on, you know, or I can do a Skype and I can show you. A lot of people are just going to use a UV and you know, unwrap the UV and apply the UV. I never use UVs, so it's not something that I would be super helpful with in that context, you know, because a lot of times you just take the arm, unwrap the arm, apply it to the and then apply it. Is how a lot of people are going to do that. But yeah, let me look at it and then. Oh, wow, what is that? I got sharp things in my seat. I'm like, will you do me a huge favor and crack the window just a little bit more?
Yeah, it's a little sleepy in here.
No, I got hot boxing in here for sure.
Too many processors.
Right. And then I'll look at it, and either later on when I'm done with this, and or we can look at it in Skype if you want. All right, so as you can see, by coming in, adding the geometry in here where we need it, and then what I'm probably going to do, which is, we can't use twist in a quad. So because I have XZ right here, I often use the SK twist to come in and add a line, but if you'll notice, it's cutting in here and adding here. It can only work one axis at a time, so we don't use that tool. The swirl tools are tools that have axis information, often don't work very good in the quad symmetry. Now you'll notice I'm still resisting just going in and cutting lines here, right? We're trying to give it reflection planes. So as you move around, the light will reflect off these dramatically differently, right? And so you just have to keep thinking about how light yeah, just Skype me at it's just Tomas Wittelsbach. Just Skype me, and you know, whenever you have the opportunity. I mean, I sit and work most of the time, so I'm usually here, so feel free to I mean, normally I would just how I would probably do it is would have sort of extracted it from the flat, and I would just push it around until it matched where I wanted it or something in that vein. Yeah, send me a pic, and then we can go over it and look at it for you. Alrighty, so here we go. And so this is where I might come in and cut in this line. But as you notice, I established the dimensionality before I came in to cut it in. Because if you're just drawing lines in, you're thinking about your object, thinking about your object two-dimensionally, and that's what we want to try to avoid. Right? And you'll notice I'm not cutting these in as huge, horrible lines. We're just getting them to change planes. Because now we're going to come in, kick this up some, and that's going to be a nice reflective surface as well. Every time you change the angle the light's going to play off of it, it'll give you dramatically different flashing, and that's sort of what you're looking for, you know. Because once again, this is tiny. So the actual anatomy isn't really what the issue is here. We're trying to sell anatomy at 0.5 mil. So and don't be afraid, like once you sort of have some rough stuff in there, don't always, you can just move it kind of around to where you want it as well to kind of capture what you're looking for. Oh, but be careful. You can smooth it out too much. Save. And the key is how to get the exaggeration so your so the detail shows, you know, and how to because you obviously, you know, like her head was in scale, but it looked like crap because it looked too small. So we're gonna just get rid of some of that. And get her eyes just a little closer together, I think. It'll open a little more. Okay. Clay tubes. And once again, it's really not about the actual anatomy at this point, but how it reads, right? From a long way away. And now once again, if you'll notice, like I said, I came in and, I came in and added clay and started to define these planes this way, as opposed to coming in and drawing my detail in, right? As opposed to just coming in and going, oh, I got a crack here. But now that I know where that plane level is, I can come in and accent where I want it to be, And so, once again, what the reality is and what's going to sell at 0.5 millimeter are often very different things. So, contemplate right. That is too high, and we want a little more geo in here so I can make these reflective edges sharp. So we're going to exaggerate that a little. Let's take Move Elastic and just get this a little bit tighter there. Oops. And then define the edge of that lip. Make that a nice half round. And then make this transition a little sharper than it would be naturally. Just so that edge really reads bright. Alright. Come back in. Give the jawline a little boost. Let's fill it up. That's just going to give it a line to reflect off of. SK trim, kind of knock that down. And because I have this dimensionality in here and I kind of want to play with these shapes, I'll probably punch this So you can see by adding that little bit there, we really can kick up that reflective surface. It's a little lumpy still. Just change your brush size, smooth it out a little more. It's still big enough to smooth. Right. There, we got rid of that lump for the most part, I think. Well, now that's funny. It looks a lot more dramatic on this side, doesn't it? Move. That's a weird old area. I don't know what happened there. We're gonna bring that out some. All right. Now I will gonna punch this eyelid just a bit more. Come in here, grab move elastic, and we're just going to pull this out just a touch more so that lid really is off of that. And that'll eventually cast a shadow going down. This is a personal project. Well, for this kind of stuff, I find it absolutely fabulous. I still, in my block up process, I do still like to be a little crisper than the Sculptress Pro allows me to be. But for this kind of stuff, I find it, you know, once I've decimated, I find it incredibly powerful to come in after the decimation and define sort of where you want things to go. So turn back face masking off, and I'm going to use the build-up as a way to come in and define some of these edges where remember, a lot of this stuff you're not going to see in the print. You know, we're dealing with like 100, 125 microns, and a print will get it, but the first polish and this stuff is going to go right away. So I'm not too stressed about this decimation noise necessarily. Let's kick this up just a little more. You can see how I have the build-up set. It's a little choppier, so as it's cutting through the it's leaving nice reflection planes. And you can see how they have kind of that chop to it, and I've set it so it does that. So it's not just smooth, so it gives me something to play with, right? And And we're just defining reflection planes, right? Because from back here, that's where you're going to start to see this stuff, right? Now, as you can see, we're starting to get, you know, up into our million range. And this is where I find that most printers can take up to 1 million. I mean, there's some that can take 30 million, but because we're adding more geometry in here, right? And we're just getting closer and closer in our geometry to our limits. Let's say 1 million. Okay, so we just hit 1 million. So what do we do? Anyone? I just find I have custom set to 500,000, and now even though what we've done is we've added a lot more detail into it at this point. So when we redecimate it, it's going to try to contemplate that geometry, right? And so now let's do 500. Normally I'll duplicate before I do this, only because I will then reproject detail if I lose it. We'll do this one first, though. And boom, there we go. So now we're at 500,000, and look. Okay, so we're going to go back. Right. So that's 1 million. And that's 500,000. So the decimation algorithms are awesome because now it knows that it's supposed to think about more geometry in there. So what's it do? It thinks about more geometry with where it is. Well, I decimate the project whenever I'm trying to control. So this is the original model in different parts, right? And now that I have this tool, you know, you can see where I was just blocking it up and kind of getting it there. And this is like 4.5 million polys. And this is 500,000 polys. Oops, no, frame. So if I were doing this, I would have this full geo model, right? And then as I would start to go in and detail it, I would duplicate it, decimate it, and then start just tuning in my detail, right? Because you can see how these feathers are really pushing it, like these are not particularly great feathers. I probably did this sculpt now at least, well, probably pushing 5 years ago. And so some of the things that I now do, I was just kind of developing. You can see I'm starting to work on layers, but here I was still cutting deep lines. And these deep lines are going to add visual chaos, where if we come over here and when I start doing this, when we come in to work on the feathers, we're going to keep a fairly large smooth, and we're going to knock these back. Just by knocking that back a little, where we're actually retaining layers, this is going to read much cleaner, where it's not, where we're not doing this to define, because all you're doing is creating, you're confusing where the levels are. So we can come back and once again, Normally I'm going to use SK Twist, and I'm going to pull this here, keep that there, pull that, and you see how this level, this is now definitely in front of that, where if you cut big lines, right, a lot of people just outline everything. Well, when you start getting small, well, what's on top of what? It's very, very hard to tell at this point, right? So you really want to think of them in layers, right? What's in front of what? If there's something that is in front of something, make sure that it's in front of it, you know? That's really important. That's kind of why I'm redoing this. I'm sending this model out as a retest on a new printer, so I want to see what it does. Supposedly it'll print at 9 microns, which is kind of exciting. So, and you can see some of this got soft. I just come back in and touch it up again. Her ear obviously got soft, but we're gonna smooth that out. Add geometry. Let's go back to here so you can see what's actually happening, right? Adding geometry. Okay, boop. Come back with clay tubes. And I'm just going to start to define my edges, right? Yeah. Get a little meat. Cut that back behind that. This is sitting in front. Just retapping it with having smooth be sort of your mesh recalibration, right? Because it's doing this. So boom. So we come back in, smooth to add geometry. I want clay tubes because I like my sharp edges, like I said. This gets, let's bring this out some just so it's not getting weird just yet, because that's not where the ear hole is. Okay, so this comes behind, this sort of comes out, and once again we're not being super anatomically correct because this ear is 0.5 millimeter, like I said. So you just want to make sure that its reflective planes are telling the story of an ear. Right, pull out, see what it's doing. They're a little high, but I'm not going to go through too much of that because once again, 0.5 mil, who cares? And now we'll just kind of kick our little hole back in there. Alright. And now we come back and we accent what we've done with the line. And now we make sure that line drops back so it's not at the same level, right? Does that make sense? The whole concept of doing it in making sure your layers are doing layering, right? We're going to use this. Boom. Kick up our intensity on our clay. Make that smaller. We're going to make that focal shift a little sharper so it's a wee bit chattier. Right, when things are supposed to go behind things, make sure they go behind them. I know it sounds like a really simple, stupid rule, but I'll tell you what, it's something my students fight with all the time. And it's one of the issues I see with a lot of work is it's just not making sense. Like, what's going on here? That's making no sense either. And you can see I just changed the size of my smooth brush. Just got a little more aggressive in our smooth. And you can see I'm not getting super crazy with hair because once again we're dealing with stuff that is like 0.3 of a millimeter, so you're never going to get exactitude here. We're just trying to find our reflective planes, and so that's sloppy. Just smooth it and hit it back out. Sloppy, hit it back out. I just tend to tune up as I go. Alright. In this case, we'll use pinch to kind of bring it up so it does sort of look like a little plate. Alright. And you can see how her hair will read much more like hair there than planes. That's a little weird, but whatever. Now let's come down to our next step. How are we doing? 800,000. Just keep track of that, because when you hit 1,000,000, you just redecimate. And doing it step by step actually is important, because it's going to think about the geometry. Well, supposedly the new Solus will do 9 microns. The Solidscape will do 9 microns. But the new Solus, I saw it at JCK this was it last week? Last week? Last weekend, whatever it was. And I'll tell you, I'm impressed. My issues with the Solus were always build platform size and their software. Well, they didn't have software, and that was a big deal, because if I'm referring printers to my students, most of my students aren't printers, you know what I mean? They're just learning. And if there isn't intuitive software, they're going to have a lot of failures. If you have a lot of failures, you stop using it, and you kind of go into car sales or something. I don't know. So I need to find tools that are approachable to my students. And at the time, the Solus, if you didn't know what you were doing, it was really easy to have failures. And the build platform at 25 microns was microscopic. And now they have a much bigger build platform on the new one. They changed the stepping motors. They changed a lot of stuff. They really did a good job of improving the printer. And so I'm sending Emil, I'm going to send him this, having printed at 9 microns, and see what kind of detail we're getting out of the faces and stuff like that. Alright, so let's imply rollover, you know, so there's some motion going on here. We just keep adding geometry as we go with the smooth. Right. Stroke smooth, stroke smooth. I don't know if the new one's out yet. The new Solus, that is. I know we just got the prototype at the show. And you can see how, you know, when you start getting small, that'll read much more like hair. This I wasn't too worried about. I kind of want it to be a little bit more architectural because we're tying into this architectural plate here, so I wasn't shooting for super realistic hair. You can see we punched that down because I want that to be a strong shape from the top when we get small. I don't want it fighting with a lot of the shapes behind it. Give it some geo. And now we're going to have a neckline. And once again, this is where anatomy really isn't the issue, it's what are you selling, you know? So we're going to take this, come to slide, just kind of push this back behind that a little. Yeah, it's much bigger. It has, thank you very much, Effects Animator. It has a 110 millimeter by 64 millimeter by 200 millimeter build size. Do you have the new step motors on your Solus? Changing the step motors and stuff. And I assume you're using the new software. The new software actually is very nice. When they gave me my first one, it just didn't, there was no software. It was unusable in a lot of ways, and you know, I was printing at 25 microns and that was just so small. I mean, the build platform was so tiny at that scale, so it was fairly useless at the time. But Emil and them really came through and, you know, did a great job delivering the needs. And you can see here where hair doesn't do what I just did, but we're now sort of switching to a more architectural element, right? Just like I did up there, where I'm going to clay tubes and just sort of turn this into more of a scallop coming. Yeah, you know, now you don't have to be, you know, a lifetime caster to figure out your spruing or your supporting, and it's a much more usable system now, I think, which is nice because I've always loved their prints. The prints have always been super crisp, and they wind up being cleaner prints than the SLAs because the projectors don't have the space between the lasers, so yeah, too much. Let's undo that. That's more interesting. So I don't know how many people here are know much about printing, let's put it that way. But the Formlabs is a SLA, so it's using a laser that's tracking, and the issue, so it's a pivot track, so as you get to the outside edges of the bed you get parallax, right? And the software doesn't necessarily adjust for parallax. So as you're getting to the outside of the beds, the light's bending a little more, so when you start printing long things on the Formlabs you'll get a slight curvature to it. And if you're trying for machine fitting or, you know, real close fixture fitting, that can be an issue. When I was printing molds, we had a few issues with that. Where the Solus isn't using a laser to lay down the image, it's using a digital projector. So it projects the whole image onto the thing. So your resin, you have a lot less resin pollution in it. I don't know if that made any sense. I'll show you in a second. If you're interested in what that is, I'd be happy to show you. But off the Solus you wind up getting more printable models quicker, because like the Formlabs does very nice small detailed models, but if you do not cure them right, they have a lot of excess resin in them, and you'll get orange peeling when you try to do your burnout, and it's not pretty. And so the projectors have less resin leftovers, so the burnout is cleaner because you don't have that resin pollution. Alright, so you can see what I was saying about trying to get the layering right. Instead of just drawing a line, make sure that if something's supposed to go behind something, it does. Because those little things are exactly things that the brain catches. Your brain's pretty sharp when it comes to crap like this. And we will come by, make this smaller, and just give it a nice bright edge to reflect off of. And now, really important. So that's drawing detail on. Come back in with SK Fill and fill that in so it doesn't look like just a big drawn on surface. So now you have the round edge from that surface that you drew, but you have nice cutbacks, right? And then come in, and this, once again, normally I'm going to use SK Twist here, but because I'm doing quad symmetry, normally I wouldn't have to worry about that because I would just do one and flip it, but this model is already right, this model is already fused and everything together, so you can see that it's lower, it's flatter, but in your reflection you're really going to sell that as something that's on top of one another, and that is important. Yeah. For some reason, and I don't know what it is. See, we have this here, and you see how our size changes there. And normally that would be here, smooth brush modifier, see alt brush size. See how it cuts back down? There's something weird going on with this brush. I don't really have the answer for it. Because see there, and then it cuts back. I don't know why. I do not know why. But I will just blow it off and continue to do my thing. Oh, is that doing it for all of them? That's really annoying. That's not what we want. It be functional to make a diamond inset in our hair near the top. Yeah, of course. Actually, the other mermaid has a bunch of, you mean like up in here and stuff? Yeah, of course. You can put diamonds wherever you want to, my friend. But see how flat these are compared to these? Where if we come in, increase this, we're going to smooth these out. Let's get a little bigger, smooth these out. Bring this down and in. Is Kyle or anyone from ZBrush here in the class? Anybody from ZBrush? Because I'm hiding breastises. I don't know if semi-nudity is, or if we're allowed to show breastises. I can't remember. I don't know. So we're going to do this edge and then we'll decimate again. So whoa, everybody calm down. So as you notice, we'll come in. Normally, you should probably mask those off up there since we were already there. But I just love redoing things because, oh well. Let's get a couple of rows of these in. If you're using your smooth as a geometry controller, do remember that if you run over old stuff, you have now just changed, right? See how it came over and we changed the geometry count on those? Not too stressed about it right now. Right. Shrink that down. Come back in. And here, let's just do the SK twist and I'll show you. So the SK twist really allows you to pull these edges up and over, right? And you can see how it gives you a nice rolled edge. But as you can see over here, it reverses. As I said, it'll work on single axis, right? So let's say we turn X off here. And then we come in and I'll do the 1. You see it works fine when you're only doing one axis. And the swirl brush, or the spin, or whatever it's called. Oops. It works that way as well. Anything that has axis information in the brush, but you know it's not working over here. So normally I would do this at this point where I'm just going to do one and then flip it, right? So okay, that's that's why I put my my thingy here. I just covered them up. So you can see where, but since this is already joined, I'm sort of stuck. Now I can always remesh by symmetry, but that doesn't always work. So I'm just not going to use it tonight. We're just going to go over this without it. Or we'll just flip back over here. Nah, forget it. We'll just cut the thing in half. We'll just do one. Duplicate. Oh no. We want trim, trimmery. No, let's just live boolean. It's cleaner. Live boolean. Hide this one. This is our guy. We are going to append. So sometimes when you trim or clip, you know, you get the weird flattening of the geometry because the clip and trim don't actually cut, they just compress to that point. So you'll often wind up with holes filled and things like that. Well, a really easy way is just append a rectangle or a cube or whatever the hell. Hit it, W, slide it over, make it a little taller, bring it close to half. Right, I usually leave just a little, and then make that negative. Boop. Bring that down, make that at the start.